Welcome to the next What If It's Not Depression Vodcast. I'm your host, Dr. Achina Stein, and I'm going to be introducing Dr. Beverly Yates. She's a naturopath who is a diabetes expert and author who has over 28 years experience of working with those who struggle with blood sugar issues related to type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, and feel like nothing else is working for them. She uses her systems engineering background as an MIT electrical engineering combination with her naturopathic medicine skills to help people achieve and maintain blood sugar control. She's the creator of the Yates Protocol, a simple and effective lifestyle-based program for people who have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes to lower their blood sugar levels and achieve healthy A1C and fasting blood sugar levels and have more energy in their life just the way they want. She's an internationally recognized speaker and expert in the field of diabetes and heart disease, and she's a published author of Heart Health for Black Women, a natural approach to healing and preventing heart disease. Dr. Yates has been featured in the major media outlets, including ABC, CBC, CBS, NBC, PBS, NPR, and Black News Channel, and has been featured in many magazines as well. She's launching the Diabetes Transformational Summit from July 25th to July 31st, 2022. You're hearing it for the first time now. And I want you to put that on your calendar and look out for it. I'll probably be sending an email about that. So look for that and subscribe. And if you like this episode, please subscribe and click the like button. Thank you for coming today, Dr. Yates. We've been working together on lots of different other projects, and finally we've got you here for my podcast. I'm so happy you were able to make it today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tina. I appreciate this warm welcome to be a part of your communications world and be able to hopefully reach some people today, touch some lives, and hopefully continue to keep this conversation going around mental health, depression, how people experience it, and how it overlaps with other chronic illnesses. You know, as a long-term experienced licensed doctor of naturopathic medicine, we see a lot of chronic illnesses, and depression, or things that seem to be depression, are often a very common element. I'd say it's easily 2/3 of an overlap, right? It's really amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Many people with pre-diabetes, diabetes have significant amounts of depression and anxiety, and sometimes even psychosis too. Yeah. I actually had a patient who was very hyperglycemic to the point that he became paranoid and delusional. And it was all related to blood sugars, all related to that. And once he got and he was driving, and once he got home and his family found him to be very different than he normally is, they checked his blood sugars and it was sky high.
Wow.
Yeah, sky high. So yeah, I see mental health issues, significant mental health issues with uncontrolled blood sugars. Yeah. So how did you get into this? What inspired you to do this work?
Well, there were two things that were going on. One was my dissatisfaction with the world of engineering and some of just my experiences as an African-American woman, you know, literally working in Silicon Valley originally, and then moving to the Pacific Northwest to the Silicon Forest. So that's one. Two was my own experience of illness, where having been a vital, very healthy person, athletic, capable to do lots of things with naturally the energy of 5 people, suddenly becoming ill when I moved to the Northwest, not understanding how that temperate rainforest might affect my health, right? Mold grows on concrete there. And it turns out mold's an issue for me. I didn't know it. I originally come from Philadelphia, so I had no way of knowing until I was in that terrain, that environment, how it would interact with my body. And what got my health back, my vitality back, was naturopathic medicine. I saw an experienced licensed doctor there in Oregon, and in 3 visits was, profoundly transformed, so much better. After seeing a conventional MD for allergy shots for a little over a year, every time I tried to talk to him or the nurse, neither one would tell me what was in those injections. And I grew increasingly uncomfortable with being shot up with something that was a mystery item. And, having such a strong science background from MIT, I'm not afraid of it. Like, you could give me the big words, but what's in this stuff? And they were more like, just sit there and take your shot and go. And it's like, I have to live in this vessel. If there's any problems, I want to know pros and cons. Just, you don't need to coddle me, but don't, disrespect me either. That's not right.
I mean, that's proper informed consent too. I mean, they
Well,
should.
back in the day, I don't remember that being a conversation at all in the 90s.
Right. Wow. I'm
Thankfully,
so glad you
gotten
told
better.
me about the Northwest, with mold, because I'm highly allergic to mold.
Yeah. Go in the summer when it's dry. Don't go in the winter, the fall, spring. It's too moist.
Wow. Wow. I don't think I knew that. I thought like
Yeah.
Florida's full of mold.
Florida, sure. Any place that's kind of swampy. The other thing for you to consider would be climate change. It could be the Pacific Northwest because they've been having wildfires now, which I never thought that area could possibly ever be dry enough for. So I'd say check in with what's going on now, because that was 30 years ago.
That's true. Yeah, with the climate change, a lot could change. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So let's do a deeper dive in terms of how diabetes and depression's connected. Pre-diabetes, diabetes, and depression
Sure.
connected. Because, we talked earlier about whether or not is this a chicken egg kind of approach or situation, or are there multiple root causes that actually cause both? Yeah. What do you think? What's your experience?
My perception is that there's multiple root causes. It's multifactorial. And as such, I've always found it clinically important to plant a flag with one thing with a patient or client, and then we continue to improve till we really get to where they're feeling much better. Often they can get all the way back to their full, robust health self. But in that journey, there can be things related that are not expected or not obvious, certainly not at first, presentation. Now, a lot of people talk about depression and think that everything else comes from that. Some people think, oh, all the illnesses start and then depression is a result of it. I think it's the interplay of all of these things, some of which are clearly physiological and biochemical. But I also think a lot of it is on the spiritual and mental health plane, the soul level. And as I like to say, we don't have any lab tests for your soul.
Right. That's a great, that's true.
We just don't. So
we don't have a lab test.
Yeah, no objective measure there. So with that, it's important that people find someone who's respectful, who will listen, take everything that they're saying seriously, and really think about the big picture, the totality of that person's life. I can think of some very specific patients for whom I wouldn't have guessed anything around depression was a key issue until I actually got to know them. And thankfully, it's happened early in my career while I was still training at naturopathic medical school. So my mind was open quickly. I wasn't like it was 10, 12, 15 years later. It was before I was even licensed, before I even sat for my exams. So with that, I think it's a spectrum. I don't think it's an on-off switch. I think that there's a way in which people can have a slide towards depression or a depression-like state. And I think there's a way that people can absolutely improve and come out of it. And I also think some things get mislabeled. People assume it's depression when it actually is not. It's a normal response, perhaps, to a difficult situation. Considering now with the international health threat with this pandemic, a lot of people's lives have been completely thrown up into the air. Like I just found out a few days ago that a favorite restaurant of ours is closing. It's been open for almost 40 years. They have robust business. Right now, they cannot find enough staff to actually run the restaurant. The person who owned it, his wife passed away several years ago, and he's 67. He wants to retire. He doesn't want to have to work this hard all the time, which I understand, right? That's just one example. So many people's lives were thrown up into the air, and no matter how much planning they did, listen, when you're doing business planning, you don't plan for a pandemic. When you're doing health planning as an individual, you don't plan for a pandemic. So when something like this unfolds, how we respond and the situation we're in will make all that difference. And some people will assume others were somehow not prepared. But I'm like, most people are not planning to be unemployed. But what if their job has gone away?
Right.
Like there's so many things we cannot control. So I feel like when it comes to health and, being experienced health professionals, both of us here, we know that it's important to focus in on the things that people actually can do something about and not flog them for the things they cannot control. That's not fair.
Right. Well, I love the serenity prayer. The serenity prayer is a really wonderful prayer, and it helps you to when you think about that, it's understanding being aware of the things that you can control and becoming aware of the things that you can't control, and knowing the difference is wisdom. Really understanding the differences, that's where wisdom comes in. And sometimes that takes a couple trial and errors throughout life to get to that point, right? So sometimes people become very frustrated and anxious and or depressed because they're trying to change something that they can't control. So letting go of that idea and recognizing that is step one.
Step one.
Right. And focusing on the things that you can control is really, really important.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So I would love to hear what you see as the different things within physiology that can contribute to diabetes and depressive-like symptoms.
Sure.
Yeah.
Part of it has to do with the blood sugar roller coaster that many people who have diabetes experience, right? A person with type 1 diabetes, I think, has a stronger sense of the mortal danger they are in around blood sugar control, and are usually very attentive to the details around that. And now there's a lot more health data and tech gizmos to help people, whether it's insulin pumps or glucometers, continuous glucose monitors, CGM devices, et cetera. There's just a lot more tools available, right? But most of the people in this country have either prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. If you look at that group, 95% of the people who have some kind of diabetes are in the type 2 diabetes category or prediabetes. That's an overwhelming, relationship, right? That's a lot. That's like 19 out of 20 people who have diabetes have that.
Absolutely. And it's usually related to dietary and lifestyle.
Right. Issues. So with the things that go on for people who have the blood sugar problems, we all know, or many of us know, there's a phrase called hangry, where someone's hungry and angry. It's often applied to people who have diabetes that's not well regulated, right? So the blood sugar goes up and it goes down, and their behavior goes with it. Perhaps their mental outlook. They might be more anxious, more depressed, more irritable, more angry, more aggressive, very sullen and withdrawn. There's a variety of ways this could show up for people. So if that's the case, then you have to ask yourself, is it truly depression? Because their biochemistry may not have changed. It may rather be the response that you would expect to being on that blood sugar roller coaster of going up and down. And that's readily corrected by getting nutrition in place, regular meals, not skipping lunch. It's so important. Don't skip lunch, friends. So that they're getting nourishment at a regular time, healthy foods, right? And that means, fiber, leafy greens, proteins, healthy fats, slow burning carbs.
Right.
Say again, slow burning carbs taken together will be such a way to get out of the trap. There's more details to all of that, but suffice it to say, until that person figures out what puts them on that blood sugar roller coaster, their mood will go with it. Is it truly depression? My personal point of view is probably not, because it's pretty straightforward to straighten out people's meals, get their exercise habits going, because your muscles are basically a sponge for blood sugar. Just like eating leafy greens, highly fibrous foods are a sponge for blood sugar. Right. These things are something you can actually do between exercise and nutrition. Stress and sleep play a very powerful role in the time in which you eat your meals. Your meal timing matters, right? Take care of those 5 things, you're going to be all good. But if the person is finding that a lack of activity, which is the situation for many people right now, many of us are sitting more than we normally would. We're not out and about maybe as much as we would be. Maybe we don't have the same social and emotional connections. Perhaps we're not able to interact with our family and friends as easily. Some people have immunocompromised situations and are withdrawing because they're trying to stay safe and avoid, the pandemic complications as much as they can. There's so many other things that are being affected right now. This is a situation that's quite ripe to produce more people who will either think they are depressed or who will be diagnosed as depressed. And you got to ask yourself, is it truly depression, or is it a reaction to an abnormal? Is it a normal, typical reaction to an abnormal situation?
Absolutely. So
I think that's the conversation that really needs to be had.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, what happens is that it requires what you just said, requires having a lengthy conversation with a provider that knows this. Yeah. And it takes longer than a 10 to 15 minute visit than what most people, have, when they see a medical provider. It takes a lot more than 15 minutes. And it doesn't apply just for hyperglycemia or the beginnings of type 2 diabetes. It also applies to hypoglycemia. So when you talk about, hangry, right? It's hypoglycemia as well. So it's any kind of blood sugar dysregulation.
Yeah.
And it can cause significant mood changes. But if a person doesn't know about this, and which is great while that we're talking about this to educate everyone, the provider that they see is not going to ask those questions. They're just not going to. They
don't have time. Like you said, what, a 10 to 15 minute visit? When do you have the time to have that really more useful conversation? Yes. It doesn't happen.
Right. It requires a background in lifestyle. It requires a background about how food or lack of food can cause these issues, that food is connected, and then asking the questions besides having that asking the right questions, having an index of suspicion that it is blood sugar, because there's so many other things as well that I mentioned, like stress, that is being sedentary and not moving and being, isolated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Or grief. A lot of people have lost loved ones right now. I mean, a lot. It's shocking. We're over 1 million. That's a lot. Additional above what would be a normal baseline.
Absolutely. So you mentioned something about carbs, slow burning carbs. Tell us more about what you mean by slow burning carbs.
Yeah, so slow burning carbs. So carbohydrates are a kind of food, right? It's one of the macronutrients, one of the big picture. The macronutrients, just to be sure everyone's on the same page here, would be carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and I would argue fiber belongs in that category, right? Big categories. Okay. So the thing that is important to know about carbohydrates is that there's two kinds. There are the ones that burn really quick, the simple sugars. Mm-hmm. Those usually end in the letters OSE. Those 3 letters, look for them on labels. OSE tends to be a simple sugar. It's broken down quickly. And if you eat too much of them, more than is helpful for you, and there's individual variability about this, your blood sugar will spike. So now you've gone up on the blood sugar roller coaster, right? Okay. If you eat the slow burning carbohydrates, the ones that are usually bound with lots of fiber, often they also come packaged with, nature's brilliance, protein. So anything in the legume family, beans, peas, chickpeas, black beans, red beans, navy beans, lentils. My favorites are lentils and chickpeas because you get so much additional protein and fiber. They're particularly, I feel, helpful for human health. If you want to have a plant-based diet, those are much slower burning starches, much slower burning carbohydrates. And as such, instead of putting you on that roller coaster, you get a gentle rise, or you should, again, test, don't guess, use that glucometer or the continuous glucose monitor, the CGM. And if you have that gentle blood sugar rise, and it should be like this, and then a gentle decline as your body digests it, right? That's the beauty of it. When you eat that with protein, healthy fats, leafy greens, and again, instead of that big blood sugar spike, you get a gentle rise. Your body is nourished. And then it comes down as it's getting to go to the next meal. That's ideally what should happen. Instead, some people are whipsawed all day long. Right. And their mood goes right with it.
Absolutely. And that to me is a major hidden root cause.
Yes.
Because it's not obvious. It really requires gathering the appropriate history that is not picked up even by some functional medicine providers as well, or naturopaths. It's just, it does require sitting down and talking about it. And I find it to be a major root cause for depression, anxiety, irritability, the anger outbursts, right? Moodiness. Absolutely.
People can lose jobs. They can lose love relationships over these things because their behavior is so, it's just so uncomfortable to be around someone who's like this all the time, and people get fired, they wind up divorced, etc. It's really sad. It's unfortunate. So this is part of the reason why it's so important you take control of your health. And like you said, do the things you can actually do. And nutrition needs to be at the core of this, the center.
Right. So you used a word or an acronym called CGM. And I do prescribe it at times, and people know that you can actually get this, and it's paid for by many insurances, I would say. I use the Lipson Pro, and providers can write a prescription for this, and some insurances do pay for it. And it's basically to monitor your blood sugars over time, and it's data that can capture this. Is that something that you use on a regular basis, or are there apps or anything that's free that people can download to be able to capture this data to see if it is indeed food, or the timing of meals that are causing these blood sugar roller coaster changes?
Yeah. I do use, and the program that I'm working with is NutriSense, but there's lots of options, right? There's the paid options, et cetera. In terms of free apps, I always encourage people to go to any of the app stores based on whatever technology they've got. If they're on an iPhone, an Apple platform, or Android, or Google, whatever it is, and look to see what it is that will let them acquire that data and then organize it, right? Some of the apps are free, some aren't. It just depends on what they're doing. And that world changes by the minute. So I think that personally, being an MIT engineer along with a naturopathic doctor, I find that data is our friend and you can make adjustments from it. If you're eating a healthy diet, but for whatever reason, your blood sugar is spiking in response to an otherwise healthy food, like say blueberries or quinoa, things like that, cauliflower, things that don't normally spike people's blood sugar, but maybe you personally having that reaction, you need to know that. Maybe your nutrition is fine and you're getting wrecked when you sleep. Maybe your stress levels are through the roof for whatever reason. That makes all the difference, right? So once we know these things, then we can do something about it. I think that people really need to take that responsibility into their own hands and look at the information and then adjust from there. If you can work with a health professional to do that, great, because they might be more objective in the assessment of that and be able to make very specific suggestions to you to help you get that dialed in much more quickly. I have seen people sometimes use Dr. Google as a way to try to figure all these things out. And there's two things I will say about that. One, the fact that someone is Googling around in pursuit of better health, I think tells me they're highly motivated. They're looking for results. And I salute people who are motivated because they're the ones who will make the changes. They'll close the gaps. Absolutely. The caution I would add, right, which is number two, is that sometimes the information that's available in a forum like Google has not been vetted. And so you really don't know if it's necessarily accurate. And the accuracies sometimes also indicate blind spots. This can happen in every possible direction. So some sites might say, you can only do things one way. Look, let's get real. Different things work for different people. Some people are on prescription meds and supplements and healthy nutrition and exercise, et cetera. And that's the combo that's working for them. I think you should let your blood sugar numbers give you some real good clues, whether it's your fasting blood sugar, which is just a snapshot in time, people, so that we shouldn't freak out about it. It's an indicator, though. We shouldn't ignore it either. If it's constantly high, that tells you what you need to know, right? And your A1Cs, which is the long-term average control of blood sugar throughout the course of usually 3 to 4 month intervals is when you get checked again. Those numbers together give you part of the picture. Right. If you've got good numbers and you're still hangry, your mood really drops when you haven't eaten, right? So you maybe are low blood sugar, hypoglycemic, or maybe you're hyperglycemic and you're just acting like a problem and nobody wants to be around you. Those are good clues too. So you can have good numbers and still be acting out, right? So there are multiple factors, as we talked about at the beginning of this, that are affecting it. And so if you are having any struggles, please seek out health professionals who are experienced, licensed, who can help you. Don't struggle with this all by yourself, because you may be causing yourself years of additional struggle and problems. And listen, if blood sugar is the issue, it doesn't go on vacation, and it's not taking years to mess up your health. It is a relentless force 24/7. And the fact that somebody is diagnosed with prediabetes does not mean that they're somehow better than the person who has type 2 diabetes. We need to talk about this. People have these weird assumptions about things. No one's better or worse. That's not helpful language around it. It's not accurate. It's just a question of how far out of range things are. I will say this, the people that I've seen show up later who have or heard of with dementia or Alzheimer's, some people call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, they were often had blood sugar numbers in the pre-diabetes range, not type 2 diabetes. Right. Make no assumptions about how the damage being done of chronic high blood sugar is affecting you. Right. Take it seriously. When you first get that notice, get on it. Don't wait. You don't really have time.
Personally, in my experience is that a healthy range for blood sugar is between 60 and 80. but that is I think the optimal range, but for some people 60 might be too low. So
exactly.
it is, yeah.
And you're
So
talking about a morning fasting blood sugar, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Blood sugar. Yes. Fasting
Yeah.
blood sugar. Yeah. It certainly will go up higher and should go up higher if you after a meal. So yeah, absolutely. So I think it would be really helpful for our listeners to know how blood sugars are elevated by stress.
Mm.
Right. Can you connect the dots for us?
This is one of my favorite things to talk about. Okay. Let's go on a journey, fans. Let's go on a journey. Okay. So when you are stressed in a normal situation, your body is responding to some set of events, some stimuli that says, I'm stressed and I need to respond, right? Historically, for humans all over the globe, regardless of the kind of climate they were in, they needed to respond to an immediate threat. And so we've evolved to be able to respond to an immediate threat. So if a petite woman finds that her child is trapped under a car, she will be able to become superwoman in that moment and lift the car and save the kid. Okay? This is how you hear these stories. You're like, how did that person do that? Stress response. In that moment, she had the release of adrenaline, also called epinephrine, and cortisol, and some other things, right? So these are your superpower hormones. Now let's focus in on cortisol as a primary release for stress hormone. When you're chronically stressed, you're going to get a chronic release of cortisol. It's going to be high. Cortisol in that moment when you're lifting the car off the loved one, what else do you think gets released with it? Yeah, blood sugar, glucose. Why? To power your muscles so you can be superhuman.
Right.
However, if you're under constant threat, constant stress, instead of this peaking for a moment, rescue the person, it goes back down to normal. You also, in that moment of lifting the car, got to use your muscles, which love that burst of glucose, right? Because they're working. That's a big ask. They've met the ask, right? But if your whole day, if your week, your month, your year, it's like you're lifting the car off loved one, you never got to put the darn car down.
Right.
Blood sugar's pinned like this because your cortisol, your stress hormones pinned, you're in trouble. So people talk about that fight or flight response. This is what we're talking about. And that's often what precedes. So then blood sugar starts to be dysregulated because the pancreas is constantly being asked as an organ to put out insulin to go grab up that extra blood sugar. It's like it's a 4-alarm fire all the time. The fire engine comes out to try to grab the blood sugar fire, right? And the pancreas, that organ, it makes insulin for us. For those of us who are able to do that, who are pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes folks, it gets tired. So then you become insulin resistant. The insulin that your body naturally makes is not as effective as grabbing up that glucose, that blood sugar, and bringing it inside the cell for energy. And instead, the extra gets turned away and turned into fat. So fat storage mode now gets promoted. This is quite a straightforward cycle.
Right.
And so I think that, with people now sitting so much more stressed, for some people, if they've lost their jobs and income, the cheapest foods, at least in the US, tend to be the ones that are the least calorie dense, the most likely to be unhealthy, because people are trying to not be hungry and perhaps feed a family,
Right.
Or other members of the household.
Processed. Right. And also
it's
the most
a real
processed
problem. It's a real problem. The cheapest foods are processed often.
Right.
So unless you have a community garden or your own garden, et cetera, this is quite a trap. It's unfortunate, but this is real. So that's how stress can be such a problem for blood sugar. And there's different things that are stresses. Surgery, preparation for that, and what can go with it can cause a ripple for weeks for people who have diabetes. Certain drugs, certain medications have the response of raising blood sugar. Actually, you read the label, so you'll know. It may not be your fault. It might be something else that you've taken in. Just like foods, drugs can have that effect.
Right.
Really poor sleep.
Statins in general are known.
Yes, there's all kinds of drug classes that raise your blood sugar. And chronic poor sleep or a disorder like sleep apnea can absolutely raise your blood sugar because your body perceives that lack of ability to breathe as a stress.
Absolutely.
Sense, right? We have to breathe. Breathing is not optional. I think the pandemic has made that really clear to people. We have to breathe.
Right. Absolutely. That was a great response to that question. Great response. Yeah. And so, the other question that I have that I've been really from the very beginning since I met you is to ask you about what do you think about the ketogenic diet? And I think people confuse ketosis, which
Mhm.
comes from the ketogenic diet, that's what you want to attain to be adapting and having producing ketones.
Right.
What's the difference between that and ketoacidosis?
Hmm. Good question. Okay. So a ketogenic diet, or keto, as it's often just shortened to, can be used successfully. It's particularly helpful for people who have neurologic problems, particularly epilepsy, seizures. Right, can be really helpful.
It's also really good for other neurological problems like
Yeah,
dementia as well as depression. Excellent for depression and dementia. So
right.
yeah,
Yeah, anything in the world of neurology can really be helped by this because you're keeping that blood sugar demand low. So you're making sure that person never has spikes and they're not getting on the roller coaster either, right? They're running at a pretty even keel. So it forces the body to be more metabolically flexible, i.e., to tap into the fat reserves, things like that. Because 2/3 of people now are either overweight or obese. We're going towards 3/4. I mean, wow. You look at generations ago, just 2 generations ago, one or two, like say grandparents, great grandparents. Wow, what a difference. In a short period of time, this has really gone up, right? And it's kind of not a mystery with added sugars, extra salt, all these other things that are added into processed foods. Here we go, right?
Tons of sugar.
Yeah,
Tons of
yeah.
sugar. Right? Yeah.
So what was it? 55 pounds of sugar, some startling number the average person consumes a year. I mean, it's just like, that's shocking, right?
Yes, it is shocking. Yeah.
So with ketoacidosis,
it's hidden in all our foods, primarily. Most of the foods that people generally eat in the standard American diet is processed food, which is mostly sugar.
It's mostly sugar and a chunk of salt. And restaurant food is not that much better, with few exceptions, unless it's actually a salad, watch out for the dressing.
Right.
So with ketoacidosis, this is a different situation. This means that this person is in a metabolic emergency. And as a result, the body is being flooded now with the ketones, which are something that the brain can run off of. But the rest of the body now is wondering about, well, where's my fuel supply, right?
Right.
That's an extreme situation, and they are not the same thing.
They're not the same thing.
They're not the same thing.
Yes. I wanted people, because I've been asked that question, and I wanted people to understand that ketones is a really great fuel for the brain. Really great.
Brain loves it.
Yes.
and so because it's running even, right? It's okay. The brain doesn't like to be awash in spikes of blood sugar. This is why people who have dementia or a subtype of dementia called Alzheimer's, often if you learn more about their health history, you will very often see this blood sugar dysregulation going on. Often it's pre-diabetes. It's not type 2 diabetes kinds of numbers. I wanted to make that point and pull it forward so that people understand. Don't think that if you have a diagnosis of pre-diabetes that it's any easier or simpler or better. It is not. It's a warning. It's all a red flag. Take it seriously. Please.
Right. Yeah. In fact, many people, it's so silent that because they don't have symptoms until many years later, they don't take it seriously. And it really is making lifestyle changes that is the action that needs to happen. And with their lifestyle, meaning movement and stress reduction, right?
Stress reduction.
Learning how to do meditation and other spiritual practices.
Practices, right? Like I feel like, we have that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Like I've got 2 kids and I definitely got really clear about what that meant. I mean, I thought I knew. And now having raised them, they're both in college. I just feel so blessed we were able to just in this crazy world make that actually happen. You need a village for your health, right? Some of that will be people who are your friends. Your friends want you to be well, by the way, because there's some friends who have very unhealthy habits. And so you might need to engage with them in a different way. And that's okay. I've have some patient stories that have been just so profound around that. Again, we don't have lab tests for these emotional, social, spiritual community things, right?
Right.
But all of this stuff matters, so your health and fitness professionals, nutritionists, health coaches, doctors of all kinds, nurses, therapists and counselors, spiritual advisors. There's all these different things that could be so helpful. And I would just encourage anyone watching or listening, please think about where it is you would be best supported. And, listen to that inner voice, that gut instinct of where it is that it would be helpful to you and go after it. And don't assume that everything is equally important for you. That's why I talk about progress, not perfection.
Right.
Something that's kind of funny, honestly, that I've observed with people who have diabetes is that they're often perfectionists. And sometimes they get so discouraged because who can live a perfect life? No one, right?
Right.
And so they get flattened, they get discouraged, or
Right.
people say stuff that's really thoughtless and mean. And it comes in deep, and it doesn't deserve to come in deep. And I tell people that's when you need to have your spiritual Teflon, like
right.
a shield. Let that stuff boink off. Let it just gone. Let it just flip off you. Because it's not meant for you. Don't let it stick. And if
yes, you could be perfectly imperfect.
yeah, just keep making actions and find out what works for you.
Absolutely.
The whole thing is called a life. Like I, as a doctor, I try to just stay humble. And I just look, this is why we call it a practice. We don't call it a certainty. We call it a practice.
That's totally true. I love that.
The language.
I love
we try.
That. Yes,
we try.
It's absolutely a journey, and it is doing baby steps, just putting one foot in front of the other, and saying, what can I focus on today? What can I focus on today? And let's go to the next step. But what's really important, and I don't think people realize that what you're not going to get from doing a Google search is understanding what the right steps are in the right order. And that's working with a health coach or someone who is trained in giving you the right steps for you specifically.
Right.
And mindset is really, really important.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah, it's totally huge. And that in my program, in my What If It's Not Depression boot camp, that's the first week. We talk during the first week about mindset because it's foundational. It's so important to be able to look at it as a journey, as a practice, and pay attention to what you're saying to yourself. And in that process, by the end of that journey or towards the end of that journey, you're going to be so much kinder and compassionate and forgiving of yourself.
Right.
When you're at the end of that. And just, again, going back to the serenity prayer, having a higher level of wisdom in the end as well.
Yeah. Yeah, if I can, I would love to share a particular patient story because it just comes to mind in this conversation we're having, which is just so rich around what if it's not depression? Because he's like the poster example of this. It was one of my early patients. I still think about that man, and I just bless him because I learned so much from him, and he learned a ton from me, and we were just really a great match for each other, sometimes you just really vibe with somebody.
Yes.
Okay. So this particular individual, he had, this was way back in the day, he had congestive heart failure. And long story short, he had made a lot of different emotional and spiritual breakthroughs along with working on his physical self because his heart was not good. It was very weak at the time. And we'd worked together and got him strong. He was no longer on the heart transplant list. The congestive heart failure was eventually put behind him. That's amazing healing, right? It was wonderful.
That is.
And he was so motivated. He was great to work with. And as we got to know each other, I realized there was a whole other dimension to this man. And a long story short, he had shared with me that he would get so depressed. That was his term, so depressed, coming into the holiday season. And, we were in the Pacific Northwest, right? Where, it can be gray and rainy and the sun doesn't shine for 100 days or more at a time. But he felt that it wasn't related to that. So as we talked more and more and more, what he discovered was his depression was related to what the dynamics were in his family at that time of year. And he'd even had a scenario where he'd gotten so upset, he had actually tried to kill his parents and himself. Thank God he was not able to accomplish that. I would never have guessed the man in front of me, who was always so gentle and kind, could have ever been capable of such a horrible moment. But thankfully, he wasn't able to, succeed at that, so to speak. This is a good kind of failure. And a lot of different things had changed for him after that. And he realized that he'd never, ever done any emotional processing around it. He hadn't forgiven himself, etc. That kind of work hadn't been done. Right. So you can imagine the treatment plan changed, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. And this is a testament, the fact that he had gotten to know you well enough and trust you enough to be able to even disclose that.
Yeah.
I can just imagine the shame,
the shame he felt was profound.
Oh,
that whole thing just raised the hair on the back of my neck.
Oh my gosh.
I realized I saw him now as a soul.
Right.
What a privilege this work as a doctor can be with our patients when we can really see them and they trust us, and hopefully we're worthy of the trust and can meet them at that place.
Right.
That's so important, right? Because what you don't want to do is dive in and say, you're bad, now how could you? None of that, right? Thankfully, I was mature enough myself to understand that, whoa, this is a soul moment. I need to bring myself here.
Right.
So we created this wonderful treatment plan where he would go and play Santa Claus at different places around the city where I lived, and he lived as well. And that was just so much fun for him. And, you know, he went all kinds of places to do this, and it kept his spirits up. And he realized he didn't have to continue to flog himself every holiday season for this horrible moment where he almost made it a terrible mistake.
Right.
Right. And the subsequent years, he was in a completely different place.
Right.
He didn't get dragged backwards. And so I'm bringing this up because a lot of people struggle at the holiday season for a lot of reasons. Absolutely. That's just one example of doing that work where there's no lab tests. I still invite all of you, please do the work as best you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I have a similar example where I had a patient who was not able to sleep. I mean, it's not diabetes, but was not able to sleep at all, no matter what, what we could do or what anybody else could do. I should say. Just, I was meeting him for the first time and just getting a history and looking at everything that he's already tried, and nothing worked. And so I sort of did a deeper dive, and just because I showed an interest in him and really wanting to help him and didn't, sort of blow him off, so to speak, like he had experienced, and I was true interest in trying to figure it out. He disclosed to me that he started, because I said, well, when did the sleep problem start? And it started in childhood. He disclosed to me that he had been raped by a man. And ever since then, wasn't able to sleep. And he broke down crying right in that session. This is the very first meeting. Wow. Broke down crying and just talked about the shame that he had about somebody else hurting him as a boy.
Exactly.
And then ever since then, he started to sleep.
Yeah.
He started to sleep. Yeah. So, I mean, abuse can absolutely cause you to feel so vulnerable and so hypervigilant that you're not going to sleep. But some people don't connect the dots.
That hypervigilance can mess up your blood sugar, certainly mess up your mental health, mess up your weight. All sorts of things can break. Right. That's real.
That's totally real. Yes. Yeah. So, so sometimes people have these things that happen to them or that they're a part of that can be so traumatic.
Yes.
That they don't talk about it. And it's operating in the background. It's always there. It's always operating in the background.
Like this little cloud.
Yes. And it's important to pay attention to that. It's important to stop extinguishing those things and really let it come to the surface and to really address it. And if you can't address it by yourself, find someone to work with that, and it does take some trust. You want to make sure that you get to a place where you can trust, but know that can actually cause serious chronic health conditions.
Right.
Serious.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wherever you're vulnerable. Sometimes that's going to be our genetic inheritance from our parents. Mm-hmm. We think maybe 30% of health is determined by your genes and 70% by your environment and how life unfolds for you, right? The good news is if it's 70% environment and how life unfolds for you, hopefully at least some portion, if not all of it, most of it at least, you actually have some hope of controlling. We can't do anything about the genetic cards we were dealt. You play the hand you've got, right?
Right. Absolutely.
But with that in mind, to me, it's a hopeful, very hopeful message. You can actually do something about this. You aren't trapped. You're not doomed.
Right. Yeah. It's not just genetics. It's also epigenetics, right?
Absolutely. All the environmental things that force it to express. That's why we talk about stress so much, right? Stress is the bully that grabs you by your shirt collar and slams you up against the wall of your jeans, and then it shakes it, and we'll see what actually happens, For some people, it could be diabetes. Other people could be asthma. Some people, it could be osteoporosis. People have hip problems. All kinds of things can come out when you shake somebody like that when they're stressed.
Yeah. And it's your genes that tell you your family history, that tells you how it's going to, what your Achilles heel is, and where you are vulnerable is by looking at your family history. Right. So they aren't necessarily passed down. It's sometimes things are continued with a foundation of genes, but believe it or not, you can actually change how your genes act in your current life by flipping on those good genes and flipping off the bad genes just through dietary and lifestyle changes. Absolutely.
It makes all the difference. And if anyone's listening who's adopted, now with all these genetic services, I would encourage you to go find out what's in your genes. Go check it out. Get your genomes. Find out what's going on. Don't feel like you're going to be left in the dust, because that's not true anymore. Right. I'm really happy that, again, health data, like we were talking about earlier, right? Being able to use that so that people can really live a life of full, robust health. I feel like that's everyone's birthright. And it's all of us trying to decode and figure out the puzzle so we could get there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, we're going to wrap up, and I would love to hear if you have anything that you'd like to say that we have missed, that you feel is really important for our listeners to know. Is there anything that we've left out that you want to?
We've covered some really wonderful ground today. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'd like to leave people with this message of be kind to yourself.
Right.
Many of us, we beat ourselves up. Oh my gosh, the self-talk. We're talking about mindset. Sometimes the self-talk is just not helpful. You know what? Whatever it is, you were doing the best you could at the time.
Absolutely.
That's just true for people. So please be kind to yourself.
Absolutely. Great advice, Dr. Yates. So I know you have a free download, which I'll include in the show notes. And
great.
And if you can let people know how to find you, that would be great.
Sure. You're always welcome to go to my website, which I'm sure will also be in the show notes. It's DR, like the abbreviation for doctor, Beverly, Beverly, Yates, YATES.com. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and I'm building up that YouTube channel as we speak, and I'm even on LinkedIn.
Yay, that's great. Oh, this was a great episode. So chock full lots of great information. Check her out, everybody. She's a wonderful person to work with, and and vice versa. If you have the depression, anxiety, or mental health issues, and you don't really think that it is true depression or true anxiety, or the medications aren't working, or if you're having side effects from medications, or just intolerant withdrawal symptoms, that sometimes people have antidepressant withdrawal issues and difficulty coming off of medications, that's because you have to get to the root causes and fix them. And then I can help you taper off of those medications and live a life without unnecessary medications if they're deemed unnecessary. So check us both out. And thank you so much, Dr. Yates, for coming. Take care.
You're welcome, Doctor. Thank you so much, Dr. Achina Stein. Your work is groundbreaking, and I am just appreciative to have a colleague who's willing to help people take that deeper dive in an area where testing isn't always going to be the biggest guidepost. So good for you. That takes a certain amount of courage. So I just wanted to acknowledge you. Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you too.